Welcome to another special episode of The Buck Stops Here, and I, of course, am the Buck. Kirk Buckner, the owner and the operator of NotInHallOfFame.com and the sister sites, the Fictitious Athlete Hall of Fame and the Fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I have with me today someone who, if you've looked up a sports stat in the last 10 to 15 years, this is probably the man responsible for it. I have Sean Forman, the founder, and I hope I got this right, the founder of initially Baseball Reference, which is morphed into Sports Reference.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. And I didn't create all of the sites, but I am the president of the company now. I did create Baseball Reference and FB Ref, our soccer site as well. So
I literally do go to your site every day because one of the things that I focus on, as I mentioned right before we started chatting, was Halls of Fame. So everything that you do really helps set that up in motion. But I was looking up a quick bio of yours. So like you were a math professor.
I
So
was. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do you get
I
into
so the
this?
site. Yeah, the site was a dissertation avoidance project for me. I was actually in graduate school when I created the site, and my thesis advisor, I was recently married and my wife was teaching at Mercer University. I was going to the University of Iowa, and my advisor was in Italy. And this was before Slack, before a lot of Zoom calling and stuff like that. So we would email every once in a while, but I really should have been working on my dissertation, but I was instead creating the baseball site because I had done a lot of baseball projects on the side, and this was kind of the culmination of all of those projects that I had done on the side. And so I actually so I taught for 6 years while I was still doing the site. We weren't updating daily; we just updated at the end of the year, and so there wasn't a lot of active development going on. But then after 6 years, I quit to do the site full time, and that's when we combined forces with the other two reference sites, and started building the company that it is today.
Now, in terms of, I think what a lot of people go there, at least I know that I do, is for the advanced statistics. And that's something that I'll admit I'm not. I'd like to think I understand it. I'm sure in some ways, I think depending on the stat, I understand some better than others. Uh, when I'm looking at your version of war, because there's B war and F war, that of Fangraphs. Usually yours is the one that is more predominantly used by sites like ESPN and others, and myself for that matter. Uh,
Mhm.
Explain it to people just like they're five. Why is this sort of the preeminent statistic to really measure a baseball player?
Right. Well, I think the goal of this statistic is to be able to explain the value that a player added within a season, and wins obviously are the most natural way of evaluating. Is the most natural currency, I would say, in terms of evaluating players. And so what we try to do is create a stat that you could apply across eras, across positions, and really it should add up pretty closely to the number of wins that a team had. And so obviously we have this concept of replacement player because if a player gets injured, he's not going to be replaced usually with an average player. He's going to be replaced with somebody who's on the bench, who's in Double A, in Triple A, et cetera. And so, that class of player we call a replacement level player. And so they're a somewhat below average player usually. And so we're comparing all the players to what we view that baseline to be. And so we take into account, pitching, take into account the defense that the pitcher has behind them, the quality of the opposition they faced all season. For the batters, we take into account, base running, how many double plays they ground into versus the opportunities they had. We take into account fielding, all of those things that I'd say we get about like 95% of what happens on the field into the number. And then based on that, we're able to see how many runs they either cost their team or save their team or earn their team. And then from there, we're able to ladder up to how many wins that would be. And so, I think Fangraphs has a great site. I think their war is a little more focused on what the future might hold for those players. We really are trying to be kind of the catalog of what happened on the field and what was that value in that season, rather than necessarily considering, I think there obviously is correlation from year to year, but Fangraphs numbers are much more focused on, what's that say about the player maybe going forward, and what was their true skill level instead of what the value of what they produced was.
One of the things that I find, well, actually, I got a question here for you first. When you first started developing everything with B War and other
Mhm.
advanced stats, was there a player that just popped out like, oh my God, I did not realize he was that good? Or was there conversely a player like, maybe this person was a lot more overrated?
That's a good question. I would say I think the interesting thing about war is when you look at the numbers, the players who kind of pop on there who are surprises are the ones who do everything well. So like your Dwight Evanses, your Bobby Gritches, your Lou Whitakers, your Jim Edmonds, your Kenny Loftons, players who are both very good fielders, good hitters, maybe a little heavier on OBP than slugging and RBIs and things like that. Those are the players who generally kind of pop in those stats. So I would say those are the ones I think generally are pretty underrated. And so I was pleased to see that I think our number correctly expresses how valuable they were to their team. Maybe not what their counterparts or what their contemporaries would have thought in terms of their value, but I think those are useful numbers to show. And I think that for me that's what we're trying to do is give an accurate view of what the players' value was to their team.
One thing that I love about your sites is that it's constantly growing. Uh, Recently, you've add, and I can't even imagine the work involved in this by adding as much as you could with all the Negro League players.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about just how hard that must have been just to accumulate all that data?
Yeah, it was. So one of the benefits of what we do, we have great partners, and so a lot of what you see on the site is not necessarily our work, but the work of the partners that we've been able to attract to work with us or license their work. And so even like War, we worked with Sean Smith, who created the initial framework for that. Worked with Tom Tango, who created kind of the initial framework for that to implement our version of it, which is largely based on what Sean Smith had done. And so the R in R War actually for a lot of people stands for Rally Monkey War because that was the name that he used as an avatar online. So it's kind of morphed into reference war, but that was the initial reason for it. So for the Negro League stats, there's another site still out there called Seamheads that has a lot even more Negro League data than what we've been providing on our site. But I always knew we wanted to work with them. And so we had Negro League stats from the Hall of Fame and other sources on our site, but it was kind of sequestered in with the minor leagues and foreign leagues and not as a major league. And so when Ben Lindbergh came out with his article about, why aren't these major leagues? Why don't we just call them major leagues? It really kind of I was embarrassed that it had never really occurred to me before that. We could. These were top players playing in the top league that was available to them. It was racism that caused them to not play in the American and National Leagues. And so we could just as easily call these major leagues as we did the American and National Leagues of those times. And so we made a decision to do that. Thankfully, around the same time, Major League Baseball also decided to make that recognition, to undo that previous oversight. And so we immediately struck a deal with Seamheads. But from there, it was a substantial amount of effort. And really, the thing about the Negro Leagues is you have to unwind a lot of your preconceptions about what baseball is, right? It's not like we don't have home parks, and the Negro Leagues did not have home parks in the same way that the American and National Leagues did. They would have, they would do barnstorming, so there would be, a team might play in 40, 50 different parks in a season, and they were playing major league caliber teams in each of these cities. But park factors aren't going to work the same way. We don't have complete stats because the newspapers of the time did not cover these games as closely as they covered the white major leagues, and so the box score coverage that we have is not the same. The play-by-play coverage that we have is not the same. Even the full season coverage is not the same because there wasn't a Reach guide or a Spalding guide or a baseball or a sporting news guide or the Hall of Fame that collected this data and it made it available to people like David Neff in 1960 to create the Baseball Encyclopedia. So that we're dealing with incomplete information that is getting better over time. It's still getting better, but you have to accept that there's going to be gaps in there and understand why those gaps exist. And so that was kind of the first thing. We had to unwind a lot of those assumptions in our code base and rewrite a lot of things that previously we had assumed to be true about what Major League Baseball was. So we went through and did all that. We also didn't want to, one of the things we reached out to experts like Bob Kendrick at the Negro League Baseball Museum, Sean Gibson, Josh Gibson's grandson, and other experts in the field to make sure that we were not. One of the things they expressed to us is we don't want just the stats, right? These players were more than just the stats. That's only part of the story of the Negro Leagues. And so, we added a lot of essays to the site, which are still on the site. We added did a podcast series about it, which is still available. And so did a few webinars and have continued to do webinars. So we're really trying to give a more complete picture about what the Negro Leagues were, why they were the way they were, and then also include the stats so that we can enjoy Oscar Charleston's absurd numbers, just as the people of the day did when they were watching him.
Another thing that you've done recently, if I could just shift to the Pro Football Reference,
Mm,
was, and again, I imagine there was a lot of research involved in this, is adding the sacks
right,
as of 1960. So I guess unofficially, but from 1960 to 1981, and just as someone obsessed with Halls of Fame, I have to think that this could help the cases for some of the people. I was just like rewatching the Ice Bowl, for example. So
right.
the 2.5 sacks of George Andre, and just that was not credited to him, and just other cases like him. Can you talk a little bit about the effort to sort of add that statistic?
Right, right. And again, so this is again having written, one of the things we take a great deal of pride in the accuracy of the site, the completeness of the site, all of that. And I think, the people who work in this area, who research this information, they want to know that people who are providing, who are going to present it on the site are going to do so in a respectful way, give them credit for it, and things like that. So that was John Turney, and unfortunately, the other gentleman, his name is escaping me at the moment. But John Turney was the leader of that, and they went through newspaper articles, they went through film, watched game film, track sacks that way, and they basically just literally found all the newspaper articles because we knew how many times the quarterback had been sacked because they did track that as an official stat. So basically, they went through and through deduction and direct observation deduced who all the sacks should be accounted for on the defensive side, and then basically licensed that information to us to include on the site. And so we were excited about the information. It was amazing because none of us realized the impact that would have within the NFL industry and the media in the NFL. And I remember the thing I remember most about that is somebody shared a clip with us of Al Baker, who now has the unofficial single season record. And he was crying. He broke down in tears because somebody had recognized what he had done in that season. We felt a tremendous amount of pride, at
Yeah.
being responsible for that and taking part in that. And so, you don't always know what's going to land how when you're doing this and what's going to be important to people in that. So that was really cool. We were really excited to be part of that. And I'm sure you're right. I mean, 60s defensive linemen are going to be evaluated in a completely different way now than they were 2, 3 years ago. So, that's part of the fun of what we do. There was NFL Films recently did a nice segment on Al Baker, and we had a very small vignette in there on our site. So that's been a lot of fun to be a part of that.
Also, to approximate value is something that I think a lot of people, when they're going to that site, I know that in my little group, when we do our mock committee, uh,
Right,
some of us subscribe to it a lot, some not as much. So for
right,
those wondering, just again, just a really brief synopsis. Obviously, it's very hard to sort of like take a player like Matthew Slater, for example,
right.
uh, a special teams guru. Like it's hard to attribute that. I imagine it is. Whereas when you're looking at a quarterback, it's a lot easier.
Right.
What are is there sort of like a quick, again, explain like we're five,
Right.
of AV and what and how it sometimes tweaks, because I do notice that sometimes I'll take something when I do my other list of top 50, and then I always sort of attribute that. Wait a minute, did it change?
Yeah, it's kind of so AV has evolved over time, and so it does change on occasion. It's probably due for maybe a little bit of a reconfiguration anyway. But the idea is to like WAR. Let's create one metric that will allow us to grade across all the different positions. And so, really want to stress it's approximate. It's in the name, approximate value, and so it should not be taken at, if somebody's 16, somebody's 14, I don't want to hear an argument. Why are you, you're an idiot for calling this guy better than this guy. And so the way it's really built is that offenses and basically we look at points per drive. So how many points per drive defenses allow, how many points per drive offenses score, and then based on the quality of those units, we have to allot a certain bucket of value to the players in that unit. So all of the offensive players for the Chiefs are going to get a certain level, together are going to be at a certain level because that offense is so good. Well, I'm not sure who the best defense is this year, but the Niners or whoever that is, their defense gets allotted a certain bucket of value. And so the question is, how do you do that? And so if the team is more pass happy, then the receivers get more. If they're more of a running team, maybe the running back, or in the Bears' case, the quarterback gets a lot of that value for running. And then also the offensive line gets allotted a certain amount of value. And how do we know which linemen are good? Well, we look at all pro recognition. We look at Pro Bowl recognition as well. So those things get weighted in certain ways. So, some of the outliers on there, what you'll find is it was a really good defense, but only the cornerback was all pro and nobody else made the Pro Bowl even. That all pro then gets probably too much value based on that, but we don't really have another way to go about it. So we do look at sacks, we do look at the stats, but it's about balancing these, saying we know this is a good offense. We're going to give all these people some credit for that being a good offense and going about allotting that credit. And then special teams get a little bit of there are some special voodoo we have in there for special teams that tries to balance those out as well. So I think it's useful for I've seen a lot of uses for draft capital, right? Trying to make draft value charts. Or a Hall of Fame discussion is obviously the other big one as well. So, and it seems to line up pretty well. I don't know how much it's affecting the Hall of Fame discussion, but if you look at the finalists, they're most of them are in the top 20 for eligible players by AV. So it seems to correlate pretty well with the conventional wisdom as well.
My co-partner on the site, Evan Nolan, he is a diehard Patriots fan, and now he's become a large part because of your site, the biggest advocate for Kevin Williams getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Okay, all right.
And
I would not be familiar with his. Yeah, I would not be familiar with Kevin Williams' resume, to be honest with you. So I'll leave him for the advocacy on that.
Yeah, so just one of those interesting things I sort of find just how your site generates discussion. This might not be your field, but I do want to commend the site overall, just for the recent addition of WNBA players.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We data democratization is a huge important value for us. And so that kind of hits in two ways. One is, representing underrepresented sports like the WNBA, like the Negro Leagues. We have the best women's soccer section in the world on our FBref site. So those are important to us. We want to, I think there's huge growth ahead for those sports. And so I think it's a good business idea to do that and get ahead of that curve. But also I think it's the right thing to do. We want to have, there's no, I remember an article where they interviewed Sue Bird, and she was like, we don't get the advanced metrics that the men do. And so we don't know, what's happening on the court in the same way that the men do. And so, our WNBA stats are pretty much at parity now with our NBA coverage in terms of both features. Last summer we had an intern go through and find the shooting hand of every WNBA player, looking at photographs or video of it so we know all the left-handers in the WNBA now, just like we do in the NBA. Twitter accounts, all that stuff, we try to make it equivalent to what we have for the NBA. So we're actually, I don't think I'm breaking any big news here, but we're launching a women's college basketball site probably in the next month or so. Hopefully, knock on wood, in time for March Madness. And so that's going to be a big addition for us as well. We should have 15 to 20 years of historical data on that. So So yeah, we're looking at a lot of different things. The other part of the data democratization is we make it pretty easy to pull data off our site. We don't, we actually have a button, the share and more button. You can get CSV downloads for Excel. You can actually get Excel download as well. So we want people to reuse the data. We want to promote people learning about, analytics and things like that. So that, yeah, that's a very closely held company value that we have.
And it shows also automatically because when you go right, and I'm sure this all is by design, when you go to Basketball Reference and you'll have the random images, there's 5 men, 5 women.
Generally, yes, yeah, 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 yeah. That's obviously intentional, and yeah, and they're in the search engine and all that as well. So yeah, we were trying to make an equivalent presentation there. Same on FBref.
And I think that's something that could be huge for that sport. The WNBA gets a lot of flack for not looking like the men's product. Well, it can't.
Right.
So I think a focus on stats and analytics is the best thing that could happen for them. Let's see what
Yeah,
they
perhaps.
do very well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you'll notice, NBA players have no qualms about like touting the WNBA players. Some of them are their biggest fans, right? You see them courtside, you see them tweeting about them. They watch the games and they recognize the quality of the play on the court. And I think last year I saw the on ESPN's brackets, women's college basketball reached like I think 10 or 12% of all brackets were for the women's tournament. When
Oh,
like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it was 2%. So that there's a growing recognition there. The NCAA softball gets better. The Women's College World Series gets better ratings than the Men's College World Series on TV. So it's there are definitely sports where women's and obviously the Women's World Cup is this summer, so we're gearing up for that as well. So it's there's zero doubt that it's growing. The franchises are growing in value. It's going to be a big, if it's not already, it's going to be a big pretty big deal.
okay. Well, I know that you've got limited time, and thank you again for doing this. I do have to just throw one Hall of Fame question at you because
Okay.
that's what I do.
Okay.
Most wanted player that's not that you would like to see in the Baseball Hall of Fame that currently is not.
Well, I mean, I actually have a vote, so I get to vote for the Hall of Fame. So I, I I did vote for Bonds and Clemens and Ramirez and those folks. So I think they should be in the Hall of Fame. He's not eligible yet, but I'm concerned that he won't get elected, and I think he's very worthy. Chase Utley would be pretty high on my list of
Okay.
worthy candidates. I think also somebody like Kenny Lofton deserves a lot more. I mean, he has like 70 WAR. It also blows my mind that Andrew Jones isn't in the Hall of Fame. The guy, 500 home runs, 10 gold, 7 or 8 Gold Gloves at least in center field. I mean, the fact that he cannot even like remotely get into the Hall of Fame just blows my mind. I don't know. Uh, it just boggles my mind that somebody like him can't get in, but Billy he's finishing behind Billy Wagner, which is a whole other issue that I probably
Oh,
shouldn't get
don't get me
into.
started on Billy Wagner.
Yeah, I'm not a big
Sorry.
reliever guy. So I mean I think an interesting proxy for Hall of Fame discussions is how much salary these players were paid over the course of their careers. Like how much value did the teams actually put on them as players? And I mean, guys like Mark Burley, Andy Pettit, and Tim Hudson made like 50% more dollars in their careers than Billy Wagner did because teams know that a reliever is not as valuable as a very good starting pitcher. And so, we could debate whether Pettit or Burley or people like that should be in the Hall of Fame. But I think for me, it's very clear that they're more worthy candidates than Billy Wagner is. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm guessing nobody gets in on this ballot. But I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping Scott Rowland maybe somehow sneaks in, but we'll see.
Yeah, it always seems like the prognostication always sort of like goes down 10% from what Ryan Thibodeau does.
Right, right. Yeah, I think whatever. Yeah, I haven't looked recently to see where he's at with them, but it does not seem likely that they're going to get in. So
Mhm.
that's our wager in the office at least is that it'll be a Fred McGriff day in Cooperstown this summer. So we'll see.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. Hopefully, I could have you on again. This meant a lot to me personally, and thank you for all the work that you and your company has done.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Stay safe, everybody.